Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on May 19th, 2023 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is simply to tell you that you can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled Podcast. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show and or search the archives for past shows you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And just a quick reminder, the show drops now every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. So you can listen as it's live or anytime after. And while you're there, you'll see above the most recently posted show a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our individual sun sign, actually needs to be happy. This is based on an interview I did with Stephen Forrest a couple of years ago, and he has given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of promoting the validity of astrology in our lives. And yes, it will sign you up for my Conversations About Consciousness astrological newsletter, but you can, of course, unsubscribe anytime. So be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, whether, again, you do so live or after the fact. And please enjoy some words of astrological wisdom. Now, separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page, Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. I posted also on my Facebook personal page, SHERI HASAN, so you can find it there too. And I'm posting now on Instagram under karmic.evolution, so feel free to follow me there as well. Thanks. Finally, I'm offering still my discounted 75-minute, that's an hour and a quarter, Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125. And that offer is for radio show or podcast listeners only. So if you're interested in astrology and you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart and why you're here, essentially, right? It's like we use the metaphysical art of astrological chart interpretation. When I say we, I mean us astrologers, reputable astrologers, in order to help our clients gain greater consciousness about their soul's true mission and their true purpose in this lifetime. So if you would like to move from chaos to clarity and learn what might be holding you back from achieving your most cherished desires in this lifetime in the areas of greatest importance to you. That could be your relationships, could be your career and your job, which of course is often related to finances, and or your health, then this is the reading for you. So if you book this reading, we'll look at how the energies into which you entered this lifetime may be keeping you stuck in old habitual patterns, or what I call soul-conditioned behavior, and how such knowledge can assist you to think differently, and make different, more positive choices moving forward. The real benefit of an astrological reading, I would say, after having done them professionally since 2008, is that they validate for the client the energies that they may always have suspected they possess, but were unsure about them, and therefore unsure about how to proceed to use them in a way that benefits them. So, gaining greater consciousness through astrological insight can actually help us see our lives really in the past, right? Whether we're looking at this lifetime, early childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, or whatever, or we're looking in terms of looking at the chart from the evolutionary point of view, which is past life karma, which we can read in a simple natal chart reading as well. It gives you, again, greater insight into where you may have been conditioned into carrying certain beliefs, and how those certain beliefs may not be emanating from your true soul, but rather represent what you were told, taught, or forced to believe either early in this lifetime or as a hangover from past life karma, that now your soul can enlighten you is not really the essence of your true being. So if you would like to gain more of this knowledge so that it can assist you to make different, as I said, more positive choices moving forward now, and if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through such greater astrological insight, that is easy when you take advantage of this special discounted offer. And you can find this discounted offer for Karmic Evolution's Natal Insight reading at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. And as I often like to say, conscious awareness has never been either so easy or so affordable. All right, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. Mercury's direct as of May 14th. Yay! And Jupiter entered Taurus May 16th for a whole year. Double yay! However, before we get carried away by Jupiter's expansive exuberance and dig more deeply into today's May 19th Taurus new moon energy, as well as what's on tap when Mars enters Leo and opposes Pluto in Aquarius tomorrow, May 20th, and the Sun's entrance into Gemini, May 21st, and more of next week's astrological energies, let's regroup and review for a bit. So if we widen our astrological lens, we'll remember that Pluto's retrograde now in Aquarius, calling us to regroup, rethink, and redo our plans for mobilizing to achieve social reform. We'll expect some pushback when Pluto retrogrades back into stalwart, rigidly protective of past traditions, Saturn-ruled Capricorn June 11th. So stay tuned, and I'll have more on this in this podcast as well. Neptune, which of course is the second farthest out planet from the Sun, Pluto being the first. Well, Neptune's still in Pisces, and he will be there until he enters Aries circa March 31st of 2025. Now, he continues doing his watery thing, dissolving boundaries between the real and the unreal, in some cases causing mass psychosis, and in others allowing those tapped into collective energies in a more positive way to feel more empathy for the suffering people of this world and to try to do something about it. And let's not forget, too, unless you think I'm beating a dead horse, yes, I've spoken about this numerous times, but I really still feel it is a major, major energy that was triggered with the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces on April 12th of 2022, because it's an energy that I believe sparked an expansion, Jupiter, and an easy flow, which would be Neptune. It sparked an expansion and easy flow of confusion, illusion, and delusion, which is some of the ways we describe the qualities of the planet Neptune in psychological parlance, within the collective in the wake of the 2020 U.S. presidential election here in the U.S. Of course, and the claims have been made elsewhere too by Bolsonaro in South America that his election was rigged, etc. Of course, this conjunction also highlighted, since Neptune's entrance into the sign of the watery realm of our collective unconscious in April of 2011, the proliferation of conspiracy theories and other dis and misinformation which flowed like water via boundaryless internet-driven social media platforms and places of that nature, where information is dispersed quickly, rapidly, and often so rapidly that it just goes by quickly and it's unquestioned. So if we really boil these two archetypal energies by both planets and sign, especially since Jupiter's the traditional and Neptune the modern ruler of Pisces, we get an expansion, Jupiter, of lies, deceits, illusions, and delusions, all of which cause confusion. Now, again, I've said this before, but I do feel like it bears repeating because I think so often those of us who are either astrologers, astrology students, or simply astrology enthusiasts forget that an energy doesn't necessarily culminate when it is exact. It can trigger for the future. And these are two. Neptune's a very slow-moving planet. Jupiter, of course, a little bit more. We're going to talk about his ingress into Taurus in a minute. But, he spent almost a year in Pisces. So Jupiter also represents archetypally both law and religion. And we've seen the expansion also, which is Jupiterian, the expanded conflation or merging, which is very much related to Neptune's Pisces, of religion with law, something that came into greater or more stark relief when projected more prominently onto the world stage by the time of the Jupiter-Neptune 2022 conjunction, if not before. Now, of course, this culminated pretty much with the U.S. Supreme Court's Dobbs decision of June 2022 as well, that allowed a fundamentalist religious tenets about when life begins to trump the rights of bodily autonomy of women, and sparked another divide between what's fact and what's fiction nationwide, since it left the debate up to individual states. Now, Jupiter also represents foreigners, foreign cultures, foreign countries, and we've seen the increased dissemination of a lot of confusing information, if not outright lies and conspiracy theories, which undeniably did exist prior to the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction under its energies. But I mentioned this last week in relation to Saturn's current transit through Neptune or Jupiter-ruled Pisces, and you could take your pick either way, because Pisces represents water, and water flows. So, case in point, since this conjunction lies, political and religious propaganda, conspiracy theories, etc., have flowed freely across the globe like, water. All right. Uranus, well, he continues to change our stubborn resistance to old values one at a time, or in some cases all at once through shocking events, at least since he's been in Taurus since April 17th of 2018. Uranus is archetypally always about the universal law that change is the only constant, while Pluto's always about change or be changed, as both help us to ensure that we mortals continue to adapt, survive, evolve, and thrive into the future, rather than stagnate, become obsolete, fossilize, and die before our time, or I should say become extinct. So meanwhile, Saturn's in Pisces now since March 7th, where he'll remain until May 25th of 2025, when he first enters Aries. And unlike gung-ho Uranus, who says the longer you've waited to make changes, the faster, more suddenly, shockingly, and surprisingly these changes will occur, even if they knock you off your chair, or while in Taurus, your comfy couch. In the process, Saturn resists change. Now, Saturn's resistance becomes obvious when we simply look around at those who prefer to remain stuck in the old ways of the past, rejecting future progress, fearing they'll become obsolete, and yes, old, if they're forced to change too rapidly. Now, slow and steady is okay for earthy, leaden Saturn, but he still prefers to view the world the way it was 40 years ago, rather than how it might be 40 years hence. He sees no value in rocking the boat or jeopardizing his hard-fought and hard-won position in life by having to change anything now. In fact, from Saturn's vantage point, that's just crazy. So right now we can see the dichotomy between Pluto's mission in Aquarius, progressive change through social reform, and Uranus and Taurus's desire to teach us that resisting change is futile because it's going to happen anyway, and Saturn's intransigence toward future change. He's an if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of guy, after all. However, while Saturn's in Pisces, and I mentioned this ad nauseum last week, but it bears mentioning again here as part of an overall review, he's swimming in some potentially shark-infested waters. And that's because Neptune-ruled Pisces represents the unconscious, as I noted, while Saturn's all about, well, if I can see it, and only if I can see it, then and only then will I believe it. So, like, water isn't exactly Saturn's happy place. And Pisces, which brings up from the depths of the ocean, a metaphor for our subconscious, a whole lot of flotsam and jetsam for us to wade through psychologically, Saturn becomes fearful that he'll become overwhelmed, confused, or worse yet, driven mad by what arises from the depths of his own psyche. And so, in short, he prefers not to become entangled in such business. Better to just continue with his plans to achieve something grander than before, or to simply maintain what he's got. His reputation in society, his position of power since he's climbed that mountain towards success, or I should say successfully climbed that mountain towards success, or if young, perhaps still to shoot for goals to attain these things. You know, Saturn's about a successful reputation and gaining greater power. He's not the same as Pluto in that respect, because Pluto wants to change things through being powerful. Saturn just wants to sit in judgment. He wants that kind of power. So, you know, the positive Saturn is the judge who's fair and justice is blind and all that. And the more critical Saturn or more judgmental Saturn can be prejudiced based on his beliefs that were formed at a younger age or based on, you know, one's own experiences. So it's the achieving of such positions of power that can lead individuals to believe, and again, Saturn's about our beliefs, that we're above the law. So let's turn now to Jupiter, the great benefic who brings blessings according to traditional astrologers, and his entrance into Taurus on May 16th. Since Venus, known traditionally as the lesser benefic, rules Taurus, this transit may well bring an expansion of harmony, peace, love, beauty, serenity, and creativity to, in particular, our relationships. It may also bode well for our resources, including financial ones, or the ways in which we gain resources, say through our jobs or careers, since Venus's Taurus rules the second house. Second house is how we make our money. So we'd expect then an expansion of good fortune around just these themes for the next year or so, until Jupiter leaves Taurus for Gemini on May 24th of 2024, right? Well, let's first remember that Jupiter brings these blessings, when we bottom line its true purpose, in the form of expansion of consciousness. As the natural ruler of the ninth house, Jupiter's archetypal association with higher education, philosophy, law, religion, and travel, traditionally defined as long-distance travel or travel over water, his energy boils down to the fact that these are exactly the necessary ingredients humans need to expand their minds beyond their mundane, more Geminian third house local world. So Jupiter ruled Sagittarius represents the polar zodiacal opposite of Mercury's Gemini, which represents elementary learning. I've said this before, but I've come to the point where I don't like the narrowness of the definition of early childhood learning for Gemini in the third house, because I don't think it matters when you learn something. The point is that if you didn't know it before, you're learning it from a rudimentary or elementary level. Any of us can do that any time in our lives. We don't have to be in preschool or kindergarten or elementary school or junior high school or even in high school. We can do it as adults. So therefore, Jupiter and Sagittarius stand for higher learning whenever we learn it. Jupiter seeks to expand our consciousness by taking what we've learned on an elementary level, again, whether that's related to our early schooling or later on in life, or even for those who didn't go to school, maybe it was learned behavior, how to survive on the streets, right? Makes no difference what the elementary learning was or why, we had to learn what we had to learn. It's just basic information that we needed to survive. But again, Jupiter seeks, like I said, to expand our consciousness by taking what we've learned and transcending these basics of information by discovering through them the greater meaning of our lives. So we go from the little local, the analogy of the early childhood learning is you go from preschool, kindergarten, and elementary school to college and to masters and to PhDs. But they're symbolic. That's a metaphor for how we grow and we learn, and we do that by expanding our minds, right? And of course, travel, whether it's travel of the mind or literal travel, where we go to other places in the world where we learn about different cultures and different types of people and different religions and different laws, etc. So, I just want to be clear about that. So, in short, Jupiter and Sag and the ninth house rule our reason for existing. They rule the route that we need to take to expand our minds, learn, and grow in consciousness about why the F we're here. Sorry, that's the New Yorker in me. Venus, meanwhile, is about values. And Taurus is an archetypal energy that reinforces for us that which pleases us most is usually discerned through the five senses. Wonderful tasting food, soft, comfy beds, lovely music, pleasing sunrises and sunsets. Taurus's orientation is often toward the natural world and the cycles of the natural world, and the comfort of a hug or the excitement of union with another physical body through a healthy sexual experience, the experience of touch. So when we put these two together, Jupiter and Taurus, and again, bottom line, their union's potential meaning, we get expansion around that which we value. Now, we can parse this out in a million different ways, but let's take it slow. First, let's remember what we reviewed earlier. Uranus says change is inevitable, and in Taurus, he warns that the longer we take to change our concept around what we previously thought was of most value to us, the more suddenly the universe will change those things, those circumstances, those relationships for us. Some of the things, are our resources. Taurus represents, as representative of the second house, our resources, physical resources. But Saturn in Pisces becomes fearful that if we change our old values to be more in tune with current social mores, etc., then he'll be relegated to the garbage heap of time, no longer relevant, no longer powerful, no longer in charge. So he resists. Meanwhile, Pluto in Aquarius says change or be changed, as noted before, and he's about evolution, and when push comes to shove, as it did at the inception of America as a nation, hell-bent on freeing itself from its patriarchal monarchy, it can require a revolution to achieve this desired goal. Give me liberty or give me death, the famous revolutionary war cry of American politician and orator Patrick Henry, is from a speech he made to the Second Virginia Convention on March 23, 1775, at St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia. And according to Wikipedia, and here I quote, Henry is credited with having swung the balance in convincing the convention to pass a resolution delivering Virginian troops for the Revolutionary War. Among the delegates to the convention were future United States presidents Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, end quote. And let's remember, too, that this was when Pluto was transiting through Capricorn still, before his entrance into Aquarius on April 7th of 1777, which in turn was less than a year after the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. So, at which point Pluto was still at about 2733 Capricorn. So my point is that we're pretty much in the same place now energetically, especially as Pluto will retrograde from Aquarius back into Capricorn, and he will go back to 27. I don't have the exact number, but it's close. He's not going to come quite to 2733, but he will come to 27, I think, in the 50s of Capricorn. And that will happen after he stations retrograde on June 11th. I'm sorry, he's already stationed retrograde, but he's in Aquarius, and on June 11th of this year, he will retrograde back into Capricorn, and he will be there and then go forward again into Aquarius, but retrograde again in 2024 back to Capricorn, and will enter Aquarius for the duration by November 19th of 2024. So this time around, instead of the colonies, which really hadn't even formed statehoods yet, rebelling against a monarchy, these colonies kind of became states. So they banded together first locally, and we saw the inception of more states after that as the country expanded. And now part of what I'm saying is that the recurrence of energies from 250 years ago is that instead of rebelling against a foreign monarchy, some of the states are seeking to rebel against federal rule. Now, we know that that happened in the Civil War, too, and I spoke a long time ago on one or two of the podcasts about how Neptune is opposing the Sibley U.S. chart's Neptune, which was also, and squaring its Mars. It's triggering that we have, the United States has a 7th house Mars square in Gemini, square Neptune in the 9th in, hang on a second, Gemini in, not Pisces, in Virgo. So we're seeing a recurrence of that time because transiting Neptune is coming to oppose our natal Neptune in the United States chart and square the natal Mars. And a lot of that had to do with the fantasies of manifest destiny, that the United States would become a country of ever expansion, and that, you know, the land was endless, which of course they found out at some point was not true. So there is a bit of the disabusing of the notion that we can, I don't know, I guess in a sense, live forever. You know, and there are some who obviously predict at this point that the United States is an empire which has already seen its day. I'm not going to predict that the empire is over. I have no idea. But, you know, I am looking at these energies, as I said, as a recurrence of the ones that happened at the beginning of the birth of this nation. So Pluto has to do with death and rebirth, which most of us know. And these ensuing years, I think between now and the equivalent of 1776 and 1789, when the Supreme Court was seated, that we have that kind of 10 or 12 or 13-year period where Pluto will be going into Aquarius by the end of 2024, and things are going to rock and roll, and a lot of changes will be made. What exactly those changes will be, we all know Pluto in Aquarius is going to have a lot to do with technology. Back then, we had Benjamin Franklin, who gave us electricity, So we'll talk about that more, because I've been saying in past weeks that I'll talk more about Pluto in Aquarius, and I will, but, there's a lot going on there. I mean, for example, the movement of Pluto back from Aquarius into Capricorn, I think, even though it hasn't arrived yet, right? Because Pluto's only newly out of Capricorn, so he's still kind of, got one foot back there, since he's heading back towards Capricorn right now. The banning, for example, I think it was Montana, banned TikTok, right? It's like, how do you keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris? The horse is already out of the barn, dude. I think this is true for a lot of social media regulation and the artificial intelligence, which again is a topic that I will very much like to tackle, but not in this week's podcast. So, as I've said before, the current energies right now are nothing new. But I do believe that between the current transits right now, we're seeing both the early signs of some kind of revolution here in America, and the backlash against the kinds of changes such revolutionary actions might bring. So it's important, I think, to realize or recognize there's an affinity between Pluto in Aquarius and with Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, and I use, yes, the modern ruler, that's centered around the concept of change. Furthermore, with Uranus traveling through Taurus, which Mercury has just finished retrograding through, and where he'll remain until June 11th, which is incidentally the same day that Pluto will retrograde back into Capricorn, this is a battle that's unlikely to be over anytime soon, as I've been saying. All right, so back to right now. On May 14th, Mercury stationed direct at 5 degrees and 51 minutes of Taurus and began his slow move forward. It's now that we may begin to realize how, as Jungian astrologer Erin Sullivan writes in her book Retrograde Planets, Traversing the Inner Landscape, and here I quote, the use of this cycle, meaning Mercury retrograde, alerts us to the unconscious rhythms of reflection and attunes us to our inner clock by dint of knowing where concentration and introspection are most needed. End quote. The greater purpose of Mercury retrograde in general, according to Sullivan, is learning, quote, when to reconsider ideas, projects, relationships, and lifestyles according to one's own unique timing. End quote. And since Mercury retrograded in Taurus, where he'll remain, as I said, in direct motion now until he enters Airy Gemini June 11th, he's posed the following question, again, according to Erin Sullivan. And here I quote from her too. What are the tangible resources of my life? So if we look back now to between Mercury's station retrograde in Taurus on April 21st and present day, a month or so later, we may find that we become, quote, more aware of the deeper values of our resources, particularly as they relate to all facets of worth, including money, self-esteem, working conditions, health, etc. And this is according to Erin Sullivan. I quote again, naturally, this will affect the ways you relate to your body and its needs, your job and its capacity to satisfy you, and your attitude toward resources of all kinds, particularly financial. Now, I don't think it's too much of a stretch of the imagination to see how this particular Mercury retrograde cycle in Taurus has corresponded. I mean, it's over now, but Mercury's still in Taurus, to to the culmination time of the U.S. debt ceiling crisis, something that affects all Americans as we move toward the June 1st deadline that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has given for us to raise our debt ceiling to cover monies owed, or we'll default on our debt. Now, I spoke at length about this also in past podcasts in recent weeks, and it's certainly out there for everyone to research in terms of the details and the facts, but the dire consequences of defaulting on the U.S. debt would leave millions of people without monthly payments who depend on the U.S. government not to default on its already accrued debt and to continue paying things like Social Security, veterans benefits, Medicaid and other health care costs, etc., etc., etc. So, and not only that, Medicare, right? Keeping in line with pharmaceutical costs and things like that. So, back now to the recent energy of Jupiter's ingress into Taurus. As I said, this can expand our desire for peace and harmony, especially around things like ending wars and preventing the more devastating future effects of climate change, because Taurus has to do again with the natural world. Or it can increase our Taurian stubbornness, which keeps us stuck in an old mindset related to no longer relevant values and beliefs, right? Because again, Saturn with his inclination not to let go of his beliefs, which may have been formed 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. Now, staying stuck in the old mindset is actually more likely to happen short term because Jupiter squared Pluto in Aquarius on May 17th, which illustrated the collective's resistance to social reform, especially from those in power or who engage in power grabs now. So this opens, the topic again of things like the debt ceiling crisis. As Jupiter is in Taurus, Jupiter is also, because it rules the ninth house of law, and I've said this at least several times, if not more, over the past 5 years I've been doing this podcast, is that Jupiter is about morals and ethics. And we gain our morals and ethics, at least in the Western monotheistic world, from the Ten Commandments, which are basically parts of our Western religious tenets. I've said this before, thou shalt not kill. Oh, if you kill someone, then we've decided it's a crime, and as a crime, we're going to decide what will happen to you because you committed that crime. First, you get the jury of your peers in a fair trial in a perfect world, and then you get sentenced. So these are Jupiterian-related things, morals and ethics. So in terms of Jupiter entering Taurus and we finding ourselves in this crisis point with the debt ceiling, because of course everybody let it go too long, Jupiter in Pisces, I have a dream, which is fine if you can manifest the dream in concrete reality. But if you can't, then you're in trouble when it's time to wake up, right? So in terms of the debt ceiling crisis, the question becomes, is it morally okay to welsh on your debts? And is this really up for discussion? Jupiter asks if that's the ethical thing to do and questions those whose values tell them it is. Is our ability to borrow based on the full faith and confidence in the U.S. dollar, or is it not? Does jeopardizing the U.S.'s reputation, financially at least, as a sound financial institution, or a government that rests on a sound financial foundation, does jeopardizing that make sense? Especially when nearly all economists, governmentally employed or otherwise, in academia and other places, predict a downgrading of America's debt rating, such as that which happened already during similar situation in 2011. Never mind a recession or a depression in which up to 8 million people are forecast to lose their jobs. And as I mentioned before, seniors lose their Social Security, especially those who are disabled, on SSI or SSDI, veterans, etc. However, what bodes well right now was May 18th, Taurus Sun sextile to Neptune in Pisces, helping us to understand that we could use that particular energy to help others less fortunate than ourselves, and that when Mercury direct re-sextiled Saturn in Pisces then too, we had the opportunity to see more clearly what's wrong and how to fix it now. However, when we juxtapose these energies under the longer lasting effects of Jupiter newly in Taurus, having squared Pluto in Aquarius on May 17th, we can glean again how difficult it may be to move away from an old, entrenched set of values into one both more accepting of and adaptable to current and future ones, especially by those currently in power who desire to expand their power for personal gain rather than for the good of the whole. In fact, just before I began recording this podcast on May 18th, in the wake of the Jupiter-Pluto fixed square, news broke with this New York Times headline: Disney pulls plug on $1 billion development in Florida. And the article reads, a new office complex and relocation of a division from California would have created more than 2,000 jobs, but was scuttled as the company and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis continue to feud. A second headline in the same paper reads, in DeSantis' fight against woke, Florida may instead go broke. A new right-wing immigration law could devastate the state's economy and the lives of so many migrants. Again, this is from the article. Ron DeSantis says Florida is where woke goes to die. But does he actually mean history, the First Amendment, or maybe jobs? After all, his war against Disney, a major employer in his state, threatens to kill off billions in investments and thousands of jobs. The article goes on. Bodily autonomy? That's dying too. It's where human rights go to die, as well as for those unlucky enough to come from poor and violent countries and whose labor plays an essential role in how things in this country function. Last week, DeSantis signed a vile and inhumane immigration bill imposing penalties and restrictions on undocumented immigrants in Florida that, among other things, bans local governments from issuing identification cards for people who can't prove citizenship. It criminalizes not just migrants, but any Florida resident who associates with them. This includes providing undocumented immigrants with work or transportation, which is why Miami Archbishop Thomas Wensky said it would criminalize, quote, empathy. And then there's this: since Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has blocked the teaching of the true history of this nation, its founding and subsequent atrocities, along with its triumphs and successes in terms of things like civil rights movement and current attempts to bring us back to the bad old days through banning books in schools, and this is again from the New York Times on May 17th, Florida school district is sued over book restrictions. Quote, a free speech organization and the country's largest book publisher said the district violated the First Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. A lawsuit filed in federal court on Wednesday said that a Florida county violated the First Amendment by removing or restricting certain kinds of books from the school's libraries, from its school's libraries. The free speech organization PEN America, and the country's largest book publisher, Penguin Random House, filed the lawsuit along with groups of authors and parents. The complaint said that the Escambia County School District and the school board also violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution because books they targeted were disproportionately written by non-white and LGBTQ authors and addressed themes of race, racism, gender, and sexuality. Today, Escambia County seeks to bar books critics' view as too woke, said the complaint, filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Florida. In the 1970s, schools sought to bar Slaughterhouse-Five and books edited by Langston Hughes. Tomorrow, it could be books about Christianity, the country's founders, or war heroes, All of these removals run afoul of the First Amendment, end quote. So the dilemma becomes, are we all-inclusive, which Jupiter prefers, so we can live in peace and harmony together, as is Venus's Taurus desires? Or are we prohibitive, trying to build that alligator-filled moat that Saturn in Pisces prefers as the only way to deal with its problem, which essentially relates to fear? And in terms of the immigration issue, not only in Florida, but also at the El Paso border in Texas, where Title 42 last week ran out, and so there's no longer any COVID-19 pandemic restrictions to allowing immigrants in to file for asylum within the U.S. Can we sort policies out on a legal level for the long term? Can we expand where we house people who are coming into this country but not yet processed instead of releasing them on the streets? Can we hire more people? I'm always like, why can't we hire people? Why are the courts always so backlogged in terms of things like immigration? Why don't they hire more people? Why don't they give more people incentives to go to school, to become paralegals or to become lawyers or whatever, whatever kind of occupation is necessary? Why can't we find the money to hire them, and then we can expedite these kinds of things so that they don't get backlogged and create such log jams, and then politicians use those as excuses to create prejudices and things like that. So what are our true values around this and other immigration issues, and where are these in need of updating and change? And, here's the biggest news really from yesterday, which was May 18th, is also, by the way, the one I wrote you was talking about Florida going broke is out of MSNBC. I think I said it was the New York Times, but that was incorrect. But this is out of the Times again. From May 18th, DeSantis is set to enter 2024 presidential race next week. And it quotes, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is expected to file paperwork declaring his candidacy on May 25th, with a video likely to coincide with his official entrance. And there's another piece that talks about how he has told donors that he thinks there are three candidates in this race, Biden, Trump, and him. And he feels that it will be between him and Biden. So, with the arrival of the Taurus new moon today on May 19th, which asks us to plant seeds that grow into a new, more relevant set of values. It's aided by a sextile to motivating Mars in Cancer and a trine to social reformer Pluto in Aquarius. Where are our values? Are they stuck in the past? And we believe, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, to you guys, my listeners, but still, it is just indicative of the collective, right? It's like the collective fear that seeps up and is the rising tide against Saturn in Pisces that I described at length last week. The change in our values, Uranus and Taurus, and Jupiter expanding those values, either the old values or the new ones. I mean, it's our choice, right? But, this is the growing pressure from Uranus in resistant to change Taurus and Pluto retrograde as it's reviewing its future plans for collective changes to society before dealing with Saturn-ruled Capricorn's resistance again. So, again, replacing our old values for new ones may also not come easily in the short term because it requires standing firm against fierce opposition from others, like those who want to argue that Ron DeSantis is a viable candidate to lead this country, especially in the wake of what we experienced with Donald Trump, when Mars enters Leo and opposes Pluto May 20th. So I expect that there might be some fireworks here, and some of this may be sparked by issues like those for which the rigidly and righteously restrictive, if not full-on in-your-face prejudiced Ron DeSantis stands for. and I'm not going to go through that whole list because I think, again, that all that does is require, one evening of watching the nightly news or reading one day's newspaper. You really don't need much. I mean, Mars enters Leo, right? Mars is proud in Leo. Leo is the sign of the sun. Mars, in traditional astrology, is an aid to the sun, gives him motivation and the assertive qualities to be able to mobilize, to accomplish his goal, to individuate and become who he really came here to be. But Mars in Leo, opposite Pluto in Aquarius, can translate into my rights versus those of the group. And of course, that's going to be, again, harks back to the U.S. Revolution, right? So is it the authority figures of yesteryear who controlled the finances, the Pluto and Capricorn, or is the power going to shift to the people? And where are individual rights versus group rights in that equation? That's something they attempted to answer at the inception of the birth of this country, but now we're working out those kinks if we can manage to see the old die, the old no longer useful to evolution die, so that something new can be born. But this May 19th new moon has already occurred by the time you're listening to this, and it is at 28 degrees and 33 minutes. No, hang on, let me find it. Okay, it's the sun and the moon come together in Taurus at 28 degrees 25 minutes of Taurus, and that occurred at 8:53 a.m. Pacific time and 11:53 p.m. Eastern time on, again, May 19th. But what I want to point out mostly about this is that there is a lack of fire. There are no planets in fire at this, or there were no planets in fire at this new moon, right? So in addition to planting these seeds of new values that we can stick to and withstand oppressive forces against, the lack of fire can equal both mania and or depression, depending. So potentially manic action by portions of the collective may occur now, while other portions of the collective won't be able to muster enough energy to care because they can't even get out of bed, right? There's a bipolar quality to the energy right now, which I don't think needs more explanation than Ron DeSantis running for president against Donald Trump. Never mind Joe Biden, right? So bear in mind that this Taurus new moon will also square at 28:25 of Taurus, square those of us baby boomers with Pluto in late Leo. And many of those people depend on Social Security or SSDI, SSI, like I said before, veterans benefits. The baby boomers some of them are Vietnam War vets, never mind the wars that came after, right? So, and that all of this is currently under threat by those on the right because of the endangerment of the debt default. Now, what they call a singleton planet in air, which is also at this Taurus new moon, as depicted by Pluto in Aquarius being the only planet in an air sign at this lunation, that can signify a lack of objectivity. It can also, and this can cause, and this is in the natal chart, but we're talking collectively here too. There's no reason to assume we can't apply it to collective energy. It can result in anxiety. Things like panic attacks can cause phobias or OCD or OCD-like symptoms. And fire, as we know, is often fed by air. So we could discuss probably for a couple hours how this kind of inferior function, which is what a lack of an element in a chart is defined as under Jungian terms in psychological astrology, how this can trigger now, efforts to bring these kinds of information into greater consciousness. Again, under the auspices of Jupiter and Taurus, right, which is already striving to expand our consciousness about what we truly value. Well, maybe we have to realize what we value is bringing into consciousness that which represents our shadow side, which we repress, which is exactly what inferior function means. Anything that's repressed usually gets projected out and comes at us in the form of another or others. Now, as I said, of course, both luminaries are sextiling Mars in Cancer and waxing trine to Pluto. And while Mercury is now direct, he's re-sextiling Saturn. So there may be a bit of grounding at this lunation that can keep things from sparking a conflagration too hard to handle within the collective. We'll see. But I would suggest that some of this is being caused by the fallout in this interim period between not having the U.S. debt ceiling dilemma solved. Now, the Sun will enter Gemini on May 21st, and then sextile Mars, which again will enter Leo on May 20th, but he'll sextile Mars on May 22nd, providing us the motivation. Remember, the Sun, Mars supports the Sun, to proactively accomplish goals not only for ourselves but on behalf of others. We're cautioned, though, as Mars perfects his first quarter fixed square to Jupiter, newly in Taurus, on May 22nd or 23rd, not to overextend ourselves physically or financially, as such over-optimism can lead us to take risks, and risk-taking may make us accident-prone now. So Jupiter's expansion, Mars' ego drive, and some may want to increase their desire to rule over or control others, which also is the fallout from Jupiter's square to Pluto. However, the highest use of this energy is simply to learn more about ourselves and the limits of our resources without overreaching and later finding out ourselves coming up short. So thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate your listening, and I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, May 26th, for another episode of Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go.